All right, this is the 31-inch telescope at Fan Mountain Observatory, and it was the first telescope that was built up here in 1967. As the name implies, it has a mirror inside that's 31 inches across, so let's go on inside and take a look at it. All right, so this is the 31-inch telescope. So starting up here at the top up there, there's the top of the telescope, coming on down to the bottom of the telescope. And that's where the electronics go down there. So the 31-inch telescope was built in 1967, and the goal for this was to eventually provide the astronomy department with a good general purpose telescope that could be used for lots of different research projects. So the way the telescope works, it too is a reflecting telescope. The light comes in through the top of the telescope, it comes down to the big primary mirror, which is located right here. And that primary mirror is 31 inches in diameter from side to side. It focuses the light back up to that top up there. And in that middle there, there's a secondary mirror. And the light bounces off the secondary mirror, comes through a hole in the primary mirror, and then comes down here where the electronics are all located, where the cameras are located. And inside that black shroud that you see is the camera that they're using right now. That black shroud helps keep off any stray light. Now this telescope is interesting. It came about at a time when astronomers were switching from the old-fashioned telescopes that were driven by electric motors to modern telescopes that were driven by computers. And this one came just a little bit too early, which means for the most part it is still a manually operated telescope. You use that big silver handlebar that you see right here. You literally grab the handlebar and you use that to pull the telescope around and move it by hand. Now there are readouts that tell us where the telescope is pointed, but the telescope does not move itself automatically. And you'll see here in a minute, we'll see some computer controlled telescopes where you actually sit in a nice warm control room. But that means during a cold winter night, you have to come out here many times during the night. Every time that you go to move the telescope, you have to come in here, grab it by hand and move it. Now, if we look at the pier that the telescope is sitting on, the mount that it's sitting on, like all the telescopes up here at Fan Mountain Observatory, it is an equatorial mount. It's got a tilted axle right here, and that axle points to the North Star Polaris, to the North Star up there in the sky. And as the Earth turns from west to east, the telescope turns east to west, and it cancels the rotation of the Earth. If we look at the telescope, you'll see that all the weight of the telescope is located on one side of the axle. And if we had all the weight of the telescope on one side of the axle, the telescope would be really hard to control. So we have this extra arm that comes out with these giant counterweights over here. So that arm with the counterweights balances the weight of all the telescope, balances the weight of the telescope over here. Now this telescope is used for a couple different projects in the astronomy department. Down here at the bottom of the telescope, not installed right now, is a giant infrared camera that was built by some of our graduate students in the university. It's an infrared camera, so it sees a kind of light that you and I cannot see beyond the red end of the spectrum, and we call that camera the fan cam. The camera that's on there right now is a visible light camera, and it's being used for a variety of different experiments. It's a very sensitive visible light camera. So we can put two different cameras on this telescope. Let's go and see the control room. Once you have found the object with this telescope, and you've used the handlebar, and you have pointed the telescope at the object, you can then control the cameras from inside a nice warm control room. So let's turn ourselves around here, head through the door, and come over to the control room. So the control room for the 31-inch telescope, so you'll use that big monitor over there in the corner and that one up there on the wall. Those will control the camera. And then the telescope is controlled from this computer over here. But again, this is not a telescope that automatically moves itself, but that computer does tell you where it is pointed in the sky. So this is the control room where you control the telescope from. Also in the control room, you can see some of the parts as we work on things. You can see a spectrograph sitting on the table right there. A spectrograph is, we talked about it during the merit badge, it is one of the instruments that astronomers use to break light into its component colors. So that is the spectrograph for the 31 inch. It's not being used right now, which is why it's on the bench in here. And then we also have just a couple cabinets where we store our equipment, and then a bunch of posters on the walls, some of them about the cameras that we use here at Fan Mountain Observatory. So that is the 31-inch telescope. Next up is the 40-inch telescope. So I will see you in a minute over at the 40-inch telescope.